Okay. Micky, can you hear me?
I can.
All right, good. So, hi, everybody in the Zoom call. Thank you for joining us. There are 19 of you there. I'm Gareth. This is Micky. Brian McLaren isn't able to join us tonight due to a prior commitment. And you're the lucky ones because you're in the Zoom call directly. And for some reason, we're not able to stream on Facebook. So I'm just going to put a note on Facebook to tell all the people trying to watch this conversation over there to come join us directly in Zoom, and we'll have a good conversation and some time together this evening. Thank you for your patience. So I'm going to ask you for a little bit more patience while I just type this into the Facebook page.
You know, just talk amongst yourselves, introduce yourselves to each other in the chat box.
Well, yeah, Micky, why don't you read out what people are typing into the chat box?
Yeah, let's see if I can find it here. Janie maybe says, or Jane said, nice to meet you. Hello. Let's see. Oh, maybe she's the only one speaking so far.
I see Bunker. Bunker said hi to Janie.
Oh, okay. Hey, Bunker. It's a great name. Okay. I'm working off my iPad, so it's a
Linda
figure that out.
Saying hello too.
Oh, Linda.
I'm nearly done.
Everybody's saying hi. That's great.
It's
Oh, okay. It may depend on what device you're on, whether or not you can see other comments. Or maybe we're just special and can see them. I don't know. Marianne. Cool. Rich. Marianne. Hello, hello. Linda. Susan. I am at home tonight, which is fantastic. I live in the Nashville area, so I'm about to be on the road quite a bit, so it's nice nice to be home.
okay. Marvelous. I'm going to light our candle. Well, that technology worked. So, welcome everybody. Just invite you all to take a long, slow breath. And welcome to this second in our series of conversations about the seventh story, the idea that we're all living by stories more or less consciously, usually less, and that many of the stories we're living by are either not true or not helpful. And the invitation is to reflect on the stories we're telling and see if we can find truer and more helpful versions. My co-author, Brian McLaren, and I have been working with this idea that I find really compelling, that one way of thinking about the stories we tell is that humans have developed 6 primary stories to make sense of our lives, and particularly to bring about peace and security. And those 6 stories, you're probably familiar with them all. I'll just run through them really quickly. The first is the domination story, and that's the idea that I will get peace and security by ruling over you. The second is the revolution story or the revenge story, which says, I'll get peace and security by overthrowing you, and then I will rule over you. Maybe slightly nicely compared with the last time, but it's still another form of domination. Then there's what we call the purification story, which says, it's not my fault, it's your fault. I want to get rid of you. And I might do that by building a barrier around myself, or worse, I might just exterminate you. And whether it's mere character assassination or actual genocide, all of us know the hatred that can be stirred up against other people. Many of us have been the target of that hatred. Most of us have done both the feeling of the hatred, the expression of the hatred, and also we felt it expressed toward us too. The fourth story is the isolation story, the idea that I'm going to get peace and security by leaving this world where I am and going off into the desert or the wilderness and create a promised land there. And we know the history of utopian societies is that they have not worked, otherwise we'd all be living in one of them. They tend to dissolve into domination and vengeance pretty quickly. The fifth story is the story of victimization. That's, I'm going to take my suffering and make it the most important thing about me. And the most important people in my life, therefore, are the people who caused the suffering. And I'm going to hold on to my status as a victim, which is not the same thing as someone who is being assisted with repairing, healing, or even just managing my wounds and thriving and surviving. Victimization is a separation narrative that keeps us apart. Whole nations have been built on this story. And the last story, the sixth story, is the story of accumulation. It says simply, I'll get peace and security by buying a bigger sofa or a bigger house, or maybe I'll just go and invade a country and I'll take that. And that's what will make me feel peaceful and secure. You probably recognize these stories from your own lives, and maybe they're not told in explicit or conscious ways. They may just be in the air out there, but we see them in the media we consume, in the politics we live by, in the art and culture that we experience, the way we talk about religion, right down to the very small interactions between two individuals, and right up to the way geopolitics and nations across the globe relate with each other. These stories have several things in common. One is they're all based on separation, human beings separating from each other and separating from the ecosystem and separating even from love itself. They're also all attempts at avoiding suffering, instead of accepting that in a life of service, some measure of suffering is inevitable. We shouldn't go looking for it, as someone has said, but when it finds us, for goodness sake, let's not waste it. And perhaps the most important parallel between all of these six stories is that in them, human beings are the protagonist, human beings are the hero of the story. There is a seventh story, the reconciliation, liberation story. And in the season of Lent, we're reflecting on how Jesus of Nazareth embodied and taught that story. The story shows up in all kinds of other places, but this is the season of Lent. And so that's what we're reflecting on tonight, is what did Jesus of Nazareth have to say about the second story, the revolution story, the revenge story. And there's no one better I can think of to talk about this than my dear, dear friend, Micky ScottBey Jones, the Justice Doula in Nashville, who I'm eager to hear. What's your reflection on the idea that shows up in phrases like turn the other cheek, or do good to those who persecute you, or love your enemies? And what's the relationship between crucifixion and what it means to challenge our enemies without harming them?
Well, first of all, thank you for letting me join you again this week. We had a lot of fun last time and glad to be back. Also, someone gave me some feedback that I need to explain what a doula is.
Oh, what a doula is. Okay.
Yes.
Well, spell it first.
Doula.
Okay.
It's a Greek word, and just the word itself means servant, but it's I was a birth doula. So for many years, I helped people birth new life into the world in the form of human babies. And so I was there from whenever they called until the baby was born. So sometimes that was 3 hours and sometimes it was 3 days. And a doula gives informational, physical, emotional, spiritual, relational support, um, basically there to help the family through the birthing process, before, during, after, and helping the partner or the family of the birthing person get what they need as well. So, making sure everyone is well fed, well watered, and is surviving the process. So I do the same thing now, but in the world of justice. I'm the justice doula. So I do support informationally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. So sometimes that's teaching, informational support. Sometimes that's a hug, physical support. Sometimes it's spiritual support, or emotional support, facilitating, leading a spiritual exercise. I mean, it can be all kinds of different things. So that's what I do now as the justice doula, helping people birth more love, justice, and shalom into the world. Not so much physical people anymore, but occasionally from time to time. So that's what a doula is, in case anybody was was not sure what a doula does.
Well,
and when sorry, go ahead.
let me ask you a question about how that relates to what we're talking about tonight.
Yeah.
Part of what you do, you're midwifing justice, and you talk often about movement chaplaincy.
Yes.
And one of the places where I think we need chaplains is when we confront injustice, or when we confront people who we might consider to be enemies or opponents. Sometimes the struggle is so great. Sometimes the pain is so enormous, and we are sometimes talking even about the taking of life.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to ask me to turn the other cheek. What does a movement chaplain offer in that moment?
So whether it's movement chaplaincy or dueling, or even the majority of the job of a midwife is accompaniment. And I think about James Baldwin, and in both the book and the movie, I'm Not Your Negro, there's this little section where he talks about his job as a writer through the movement, and how he was kind of at first like, what is this that I'm doing? I don't am I actually helping? Am I doing anything in this role? And what he realized was his job was essentially to be a witness, to accompany movement leaders and activists. He knew Malcolm X, he knew Medgar Evers. He knew those families and loved those families, and he could stand and witness and say, yes, what you are going through is a real thing. What the experience of Black people in America is a real experience. The suffering, the pain, the oppression, all of that is really happening in real time. And those of us who are also then standing up are experiencing that even more. We are getting shot dead in our driveways, as Medgar Evers was, right? So he was able to give voice to that. And so even as a chaplain, your job isn't necessarily to fix it. Your job as a doula, I can't take a woman's contractions or birthing pains away, but I can say, I see you, and what you're doing is real. And remember to breathe, and you are in this moment, and this moment will pass, and we will get through this, and we will go on to the next moment, and we will do it again. We will do it again, and we will do it again. And we will not, there's no way to go through, but to go through, and we will do it together. So even the idea of somehow going through the pain, right? Like going through the violence of someone striking your cheek, and then striking the other cheek. It wasn't about inviting someone necessarily to strike the other cheek. Look, that's what they were going to do to you anyway. So our choice is, how are we going to not just pretend like it's not happening? We're going to acknowledge it. And we're going to say, absolutely, this is something is happening to us. And we then get to make meaning out of that. We get to redeem it. We get to say what the end of the story is, instead of just allowing that to be just the violence in itself.
One of my teachers, Walter Wink, who's very strongly in the background of the whole idea of the seventh story, did a lot of work around how can you turn the other cheek without being a doormat? Because clearly that teaching has been misinterpreted and misused to probably unintentionally. You know, I tend to think most people don't actively intend or want to do harm most of the time. But it has been used and has kept people in a position of subjugation. I think particularly about situations of domestic and familial violence. You know, you should turn the other cheek, which means you should let them hit you again, you know. And Walter's work, and I think there's quite a lot of evidence to back this up, that Jesus's audience would not have, and you know, I know you know this, Micky, they would not have thought that that's what that teaching meant.
Right.
They wouldn't have heard it and thought he's just saying we should just take it and smile. And actually, it's an invitation to confront the oppressor with the reality of what they're doing. Like you say, they were going to hit you anyway, and there's some complex math, and you might even call it human geography, in this that has to do with what you did with your left hand and what you did with your right hand, and how you turn the cheek one way and turn the cheek the other way. And you can read about this in Walter Wink's book, The Powers That Be. But the suggestion is that to respond to an oppressor who is backhanding you, who is telling you you're nothing, in the time of Jesus, a master to someone in chains, to respond to that person by turning your cheek and saying, in effect, you want to hit me? Well, hit me like a man, you know, because it would typically be a man who was doing the hitting. Hit me, and it's hit me like I am a person. And then the master, who would never actually hit someone in chains in a way that conveyed equality to them, has to face, well, I either shouldn't hit them anymore, or if I hit him or her, I'm actually, in a weird way, setting them free. And from the social taboo that says they're nothing. Now, the problem is when we try to interpret these in concrete scenarios today, of course, if a large scale number of people had actually turned the other cheek that way, and if it had been understood that way, then the powers that be probably would have made a law that said anybody who turns the other cheek will be immediately executed.
Right.
So the question is, how can we take the heart of that idea and make it come alive in the world we're in now? And so I'd like to invite you to speak to this question of refusing to be invisible when the system wants to dominate some in our community to the point where we don't even see them, or we don't see their suffering.
Yeah, I mean, like, just even the principle of nonviolence. So I've been blessed enough to be actually trained in nonviolence by James Lawson. And when I sat in his classroom,
tell folks just a little bit about who James Lawson.
So James Lawson is one of the people who basically taught King about nonviolence, and trained students here in Nashville for the sit-ins. He continues to teach to this day in UCLA about nonviolence. And this is a man who's now, I don't know, Lawson's probably in his 80s. And you know, but he's an elder, right? So he's a little cranky at times, like kind of has that old man thing going on, you know, and which he has every right to have, like the cranky old man thing. Again, he has been doing this for many, many years. But when I sat in his classroom and in the Haley Farm, here in Tennessee, and actually witnessed how he treated people, and that every ounce of his being is connected to nonviolence. And I realized that he wasn't just asking me to take on some concepts or to employ particular tactics during actions. He wasn't just asking me and the rest of the class to get really good at some strategies. And that when I saw the young people, the pictures and video of young people getting food and coffee and garbage poured on their heads at lunch counters, that wasn't a tactic. Nonviolence is an actual lifestyle. It's a way of being from your core to the outside. And when I sat there, I actually had to wrestle with that and say, okay, am I interested in that? Is this something I actually want to do? And for Lawson, as a pastor, as someone who's ordained, he did the work of understanding this as something he saw in the Christian tradition, that there actually is a lineage of this in what we're seeing in the scripture and what we're seeing in other, Christians who have come before us throughout our lineage. And so I think that we're talking about something that is, that has power. This isn't just not doing anything. That we're talking about different kinds of power. Yes, there is power in violence. 100%, there is power in violence. When you can burn someone's house down, when they were bombing churches, that is power. And there is power in nonviolence. There is a power that, because people will often talk about how violent protest is. And what it actually does is nonviolent protest exposes the violence that's already inherent in the system. And then we have to look at it because we can't deal with it until we're actually looking at it. And that's one of the powers of nonviolence, is that it uncovers the things that were already there. Like a lot of people are asking in this moment, have things gotten worse? Are we somehow, seeing an upswing in violence or an upswing in terrible things that are happening to people of color or queer folks? And it's like, actually, no, I don't think it's worse. It's just worse. Like we had kind of buried it under some things for a little bit, and it's just getting uncovered because there are enough people that are saying, we're going to start uncovering, we're going to start doing things not with violence, but non-violently, to expose the violence in the system. And I think that's what we see in the life of Jesus over and over again. Jesus exposed the violence inherent in the system, and then we were forced to deal with it.
And I think it's really interesting to look at different dimensions of nonviolence, because I think that when people think about Gandhi, at least, those of us who haven't deeply studied the life of Gandhi, I've been asking people lately, what do you think about when you think of Gandhi? And people tend to say things like they think of big marches, and they think of the Salt March or those kind of big public confrontations. And there's a fascinating book that I really want to recommend to people called The Gandhian Iceberg by Chris Moore Bachman. The Gandhian Iceberg. And the idea, as far as I'm understanding it, is that there were really three primary dimensions to Gandhi's nonviolence. And the direct confrontation of evil in the form of big public events like marches was just one dimension of one of those three dimensions. That's the dimension that he called satyagraha, which often gets translated as truth force. And that is those moments when you bring people out onto the streets who hopefully you've trained in patient, painstaking, self-sacrificial nonviolence. Or those times when you go and you sit with the powers that be, whether it's Pontius Pilate or the president or the editor of a newspaper or whoever it might be, and you bring some light to bear, and you might be risking something while you're doing it. That's satyagraha, but that's only the tip of the iceberg. The other two dimensions are what Gandhi called self-purification, which is a kind of an archaic term, and it's really to do with doing your own inner work.
Yeah.
What people might say is learning to regulate your own anxiety, doing good therapy, having a justice doula in your life, having a chaplain in your life, having a group of supportive friends, eating healthfully, getting enough sleep, not taking on too much. That's the sort of self-purification piece. And the third piece, I love this term. The term Gandhi used was constructive program. And he wasn't talking about building roads, which is what constructive program sounds like to me. That is what is embodied in the sentence, be the change you want to see in the world. And for Gandhi, that meant living in interdependent community in an ashram with a large enough group of people to be self-sustaining. That was one example. But the deeper idea was living as if the unjust rules didn't exist. Living, embodying, making the kind of society that they dreamed would come when Britain left India. And of course, that work is never done. So I suppose I found it it's both comforting and challenging, because it's hard to organize marches with tens of thousands of people. Although not as hard as it used to be. You probably shouldn't be doing them every day unless there's a strategy at work there. And most of us aren't going to be able to participate in marches every day unless there's a crisis for which it is the best answer. But I can do work on myself every day. And I can be engaged in accountable community every day and have a justice doula in my life every day. And I can begin to build the kind of life in the everyday and the kind of society and community in the everyday that I ultimately want to see for everyone.
Yeah, Reverend Lawson talks about parallel institutions. So, like actually not waiting until we've kind of fixed society as a whole, but we're actually going to create parallel institutions at the same time, so that, when the other institutions fall or get weak, we're able to then, come in with something that's already built, right? Or we're actually building, we're practicing. I like to say practice makes possible, right? So let's practice the possibilities so that when it's time to scale, we can scale. Adrienne Marie Brown says, small is all, right? So we have to do it when we do it in small ways, that personal transformation, we're working on ourselves, the transformation in our communities, we're building these communities or changing our communities in ways that are more in line with our goals and values and dreams and visions. And then the larger society change, right? Like, I'm a prison abolitionist. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what a world without prison looks like, but I still want to see it.
Sure.
So I try to not go immediately to punishment when I feel like someone's done something wrong in my life. Because for me, that's a little way that I can start to learn into that.
Sure. So folks who are listening in, I want to invite you to comment. You can click on chat or Q&A if you have a question or a comment you want to make. Thank you to Paul Fraser, who tells us that James Lawson is 90 years old.
I saw that.
So let's move to these questions that we call the porch questions. Excuse me. These come from the idea that we say that for human beings to live, we need to have food, water, air, and shelter. And we don't often define shelter beyond four walls and a roof. I think shelter is much deeper than just physical space. And I think there's really three vital elements at a minimum to make shelter. One is to have a sense of purpose or calling in your life that goes beyond the traditional career ambition, what I want to be when I grow up. It may involve what I want to be when I grow up, but it should be of some form of service to the common good. And one of the ways I think we can authenticate our sense of vocation is, does it help heal our own wound? And if the answer is yes, you're probably on the right track. because I think all of our primary gifts are found within our wounds. So that's the first of three elements of shelter, is a sense of purpose for the common good. The second is to have mentoring relationships in our lives with people, usually people who are chronologically older, although sometimes they can be younger, or peers who are a bit further down the path, and who can advise us, support us, encourage us, call us on our own propaganda, be a shoulder to cry on, or a guest bed for the night, or maybe some ice cream when we need it. A wisdom figure who can mentor us. And the third thing is, I really don't know how you get through this life without a close circle of people who truly know who you are and who you truly know. And so we've developed these questions as a way of helping people build those relationships, because our society doesn't automatically create those relationships. We don't live in villages anymore. I think we probably will again in the future, but right now we don't. And one of the great gifts of the internet is that we can create villages with people who live thousands of miles away. And so Micky and I are going to ask these questions of each other. And I'm happy to say there's been a revival on the Zoom call. We've had 4 new participants just join in the last few minutes. The spirit is moving. We'll ask these questions and consider your own responses. Those of you listening, maybe you'll find these helpful too. The first question, Micky, what's something that's life-giving to you at the moment?
I don't know. I need a minute for that.
All right.
How about you go first?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Life-giving for me, I am with my husband watching a TV series from 25 years ago called Tales of the City, which is a landmark piece of both literature and television about San Francisco, and particularly about the LGBT community. And what I'm finding life-giving about it is it's one of those, I've never seen it before, I've heard about it. It's portraying the kind of world I would like to live in that the core of the show is a community house where a handful of people live in their own little apartments, but they have a central courtyard that they all walk out into every day. And I think that's a dream I think a lot of us have, that we would live physically next to each other, that we would share our possessions, that we would celebrate and rejoice together with the good in life. And we'd take better care of the earth because we'd be using fewer resources more wisely. So I'm finding it life-giving just to see that show.
That's lovely.
Is that enough time for you to think of one?
We'll see. I think what's life-giving right now is I do have this group text or message group, which can be super annoying, but I have it with 3 other women, and we tell each other everything from like the goofy to whenever we're dealing with something difficult and scary and sad. And I've never had that really before. I have, like many of us, struggled in adulthood to have kind of a core group of close friends. And these are all local friends as well, which I have really struggled to have in recent years. And at a time in my life where I'm really struggling, I had really been struggling with loneliness, to have this kind of happen. And it did kind of just happen. It was a group of friends who had been spending more time together. And then we've just kept this kind of group going for a while. And I'm just so deeply grateful for how we're showing up for each other.
Thank you. Before we get to the second question, we got a Q&A question here from Rich Noel, which says, I understand working on your own inner self but what are some other possible examples of communities that pursue these goals other than an ashram? What you got?
I think it happens both virtually and physically. I mean, I have had some of the best community in my life. I swear to God, because of Twitter.
Mm.
It sounds crazy, but Twitter, not so much Facebook, but like people that I have literally come to know virtually who often become, in real life friends. So I think for many of us who can't find community, I live in a very small town outside of Nashville, and I'm not going to find some of this people with the same beliefs and things like that where I live. And so that has saved me in big ways. In my kind of loneliest times. And then I think sometimes it does happen, like in a non-permanent fashion. Like you and I, we create community over the course of a weekend, right? And we do that in the form of festivals. So like New Story Festival that we're cooking up, we're going to come together and do that for a weekend. And so, yes, we don't get to live there forever. We're not creating a commune, but we get a taste of it. And typically then you're going to get some real life friendships out of it. And maybe that does blossom into living in the same city one day, or visiting each other over holidays, or, just continued relationship. And I mean, we met at a festival and here we are. I mean, and yes, it does happen. I live down the road from a place called The Farm in Summertown, Tennessee, which is a hippie commune that it's much smaller than it was at its heyday, but it still exists. So it continues to morph and change as the years go by.
Yeah.
But I think we do see examples of these things.
Yeah. Well, and one thing to add to that, Rich, if you want to know more, have a look at the Rutba House, RUTBA. Google that. It might give you an example of a permanent community doing some of these things as well. Seeing that Linda tells us community is essential near or far. This is good. Ithaca, where I work, if jealousy wasn't a sin, I would say that I'm jealous of people who live in Ithaca. Although I hear jealous is the envious. Jealous is like you want to possess, you want to hold on to what you've got, and envious is you want something that somebody else has. So I am non-sinfully envious of you, Linda. I love Ithaca. Ithaca is wonderful. I'm a UCC lay leader. I agree. The internet has saved me as well from loneliness. And Linda's a volunteer community organizer. Thank you for that. And Susan asks, do either of us have experience with 12-step programs? Susan finds the kind of community we described therein. Richard Rohr, I believe, says that the 12-step movement is the authentic American contribution to spirituality. And the experience I have of being around folk in the 12-step movement shows me that it's deeply meaningful. In fact, I've often thought that we should be creating 12-step style gatherings, even for folks who don't identify as being addicted, whether to a substance or to codependency or whatever it might be. Just people struggling with our lives that could come in on a Wednesday night for an hour and sit in a format that doesn't require massive experience to lead, but just helps people go through the same format, reflecting together, building bonds of community and solidarity, and not feeling so alone. So the second porch question, and you got to go first this time because I need time to think of my answer.
Well, and I want to shout out we actually do have a community of folks in South Africa who are following along with us and watching videos because they can't do it in real time because it's like, I don't know, some insane hour, but they're part of my community in South Africa and they are following along. So
we should say, how's it?
Yeah. Something like that.
So the second porch question, first one's what's life-giving. The second is what's draining or challenging or not life-giving to you at the moment. And it's always good to limit ourselves to one.
Sure.
Because it's just a way of touching the heart.
Yeah. Parenting. I'm sending one off to college, and it just hit me today, trying to figure out all of the just announcements and parties and looking at her beautiful pictures. And, you know, I have no problem with her going. It's just, I want to send her off well. And so the weight of that.
That's a challenge. Thank you for your openness about that. I suppose my response to what's challenging, I've had a pretty easy week, and in a lot of respects, I have a lot of privilege in my life. It's been a pretty easy week. The challenge would be, yeah, all right. Well, this kind of connects to the next question, so maybe it's a blend. The challenge is where I feel powerless. The challenge is the places in my life where I feel powerless and uncertain about what step to take. And I'll talk about that as my response to the third question, which is, how's your sense of purpose for the common good showing up in your life, and what are you doing with it? And we ask this question because I think, a lot of us have inflated egos and we think we're too important, but most of us probably struggle more with the opposite of that, which is that we have deflated egos and we don't think we're valuable enough to have any meaning or to be able to offer anything in the world. And some of us have both of those things, I think one of the 12-step lines is a megalomaniac with an inferiority complex. And so we ask this question, try and tease out and call forth the sense of calling for the common good that each of us has, the unique and precious gift that the world would be lacking without. And sometimes it's a time to celebrate. Yeah, I really lived into my purpose this week, or something marvelous happened. And sometimes, as it is tonight, it's a curiosity question instead. It's about not being sure what to do. And I had an experience yesterday. I'll not say much about it, but I witnessed somebody basically making an offensive comment that had to do with race, and I wanted to do something about it, and my anger was such that I held back because I realized I would make the situation worse if I spoke with aggression about it. And yet I still sit with now, what do I want to do next time? And what do I want to do over the long term? Because maybe the most enlightening idea that anyone's shared with me in the last week is, you maybe seen there's a meme going around at the moment about how there is a lovely movement underway to share positive good news stories, especially on social media. The challenge is, if we only ever answer stories of structural injustice with anecdotes about something nice that happened to somebody I know, we're not comparing like with like. And we need to be, and by no means am I telling you this, Micky, I'm saying this to myself. I'm trying to think about, what are the stories of structural good, of places where structures of injustice have been overcome by new structures, what is called parallel institutions. It's great to share anecdotes about individuals, just as it's great to share pictures of happy pets and happy kids. But I'm wanting to think about both the immediate moment of the next time I hear a comment I want to challenge, but the wider structural question of what kind of community and society, how do I want to contribute to the community society I live in? Even if it makes me a little bit nervous, because my nervousness is nothing compared to the cost of such prejudice in the lives of people to whom it's directed. So how's your sense of purpose showing up?
It is showing up in a deeply personal way that I think is giving me more of a deep well out of which to give to others and to lead and teach others. I think we can actually learn to transmit information and teach things that we aren't living ourselves. And like, I could always teach people how to do a back handspring. I used to teach gymnastics and coach gymnastics and cheerleaders. And I can teach a back handspring. I cannot do a back handspring. So I think
I can neither teach one nor do one.
I can teach one. I can spot one. I can, I'll get you doing a back handspring, but I just was never able to do one. And I never put in the work to do one, really, frankly. And we can do the same thing with kind of doing good in the world, social change. We can, kind of talk the talk, and not do the inner work. And I think we need both. Because that's how we end up with really destructive people in personal relationships who are like known for doing good out in the world. Doesn't necessarily negate it, but it breaks our hearts. I think it breaks my heart when I find out that there's this different inside. And so I think, and I think sometimes we don't value it, or I don't, because I'm like, produce, right? I'm caught up in the same consumerism, the same capitalism, even in my work to do, social change. And so I forget that the work I'm doing, that the kind of personal stuff that I'm going through and working through, that is actually helping other people, especially in the long run. And so I think that really, taking some time and doing that and focusing in on that and slowing down a little bit, and being gentle with myself and practicing the things that I talk to other people about. That's what I'm bringing right now, because I have to be doing that work. I've been being more consistent. And it's paying off big time.
The last question in the porch circle, and we're going to be moving toward wrapping up this lovely time together. I hope it's been lovely for you all listening. I'm always enjoying conversations with you, Micky. The last question is, having heard what we've heard, how can we help each other? And we encourage you, if you want to form little groups like this, it only takes 2 or 3 people. You can do it up to about 8 people. You can do it once a week. You can do it once a month, as frequently as is life-giving for you. And you can find the questions at theporchmagazine.com at the community circles link. We think that this is one way of both helping people deal with our loneliness, find a meaningful sense of purpose, and actually spur each other on to live more meaningful lives. The last question is, having heard what we've heard, how can we help each other? And the way we've often done this in circles where we're physically present with people is we just say, is there something that anyone would like to offer, or is there something anybody would like to ask for? And Micky and I are lucky because we're going to see each other in 2 weeks' time at the New Story Festival in Austin, Texas. If you want to know more about that, it's at newstoryfestival.com. And I think we're going to be helping each other a lot at that. So my offer to you is I will buy you the beverage of your choice and say encouraging things about all the things you're doing at the festival. And the request is you do the same for me.
Okay.
Does that work?
Yeah.
And is there anything else you'd like to ask for?
No, I try and mother everyone at those things. So I will be making sure you've had something to drink and that you're taking care of yourself. And I love seeing my people and taking care of my people, and you're one of my people. And I mean, I don't know if, people don't necessarily know this, that we actually know each other and love each other and are involved in each other's lives in a real way.
Yeah.
This is not just, not every time you have a conversation, maybe it's with someone that you know well, but you know, part of the reason I think it's so magical when we do things like this that are public facing is that we have these conversations just, you know, regularly.
This is what we'd be talking about anyway.
Right.
You know, an old friend of mine used to say that friendship is the truest house we have to offer, or the truest home we have to offer. And I think that's true. And I want to thank all of you who've been listening in. I think I can't see your name, but I think maybe it's Jane, reminding us that AA is sometimes called Church of the Drunk. Some folks who will never set foot in a church will come to an AA meeting. Such an awesome program. What a beautiful conversation tonight. Thank you both. Richard says, thanks for the challenges and the questions. Jack says, thank you both for sharing your wisdom. We're so appreciative of that, of you taking the time on a Tuesday night. And one thing you could do to help get the message out, if you use social media, think about summarizing in one sentence what you'll take away from tonight. Just one sentence, and share it on social media with the hashtag 7th story, with the word written out, 7th story. Just one sentence about what you take away from tonight. If you want to know more about what we're doing, go to the7thstory.com or newstoryfestival.com or mickyscottbeyjones.com.
Yeah.
And we will be posting this on Facebook tomorrow. How's it to the South Africans?
And can I just say,
yeah,
it's not too late to join us at the New Story Festival. You can still get tickets. And if you're looking for community, if you're feeling just compelled to take a chance and meet people and explore some of these concepts even deeper, you still got a couple of weeks. You can find a cheap flight, you can drive, just get there. And it's going to be amazing. So please, please, please come and join us. If you're just take a chance.
Brilliant. Well, let's close as we began by taking a breath. In some traditions, breath is the name of God. To breathe is to speak the name of God, the name of love. And so we breathe slowly, breathing in goodness and breathing out anything not life-giving. And we encourage you to continue these conversations in your heart with your friends and with everyone you meet. You can be a sign of the 7th story. Thanks, folks. We'll see you next week.
Bye.